Okay, we're doing a review of transistors, and specifically we're doing something about how to plug them into breadboards. So you can start here seeing the my hand-drawn version of a transistor symbol for a schematic diagram. And you see that I can label the parts of it. You have the base, the collector, and the emitter. Remember that the base is the input that controls the amount of current flowing through the transistor. The collector is the input, and the emitter is heading to ground. And you can tell that this is an NPN transistor because the arrow on the emitter is pointing outwards. This is a very common type of transistor. Okay. Getting from that transistor diagram to a physical transistor involves knowing the pin assignments. So you can figure out what the pins are two ways. One is that you can use a multimeter and go and measure it, and there's a link on a video showing how to do that on the Moodle. Or you can read the spec sheet, which is perhaps easier, although it doesn't tell you if the transistor's dead. Only a multimeter can tell you that. What you can do is you can find the part number on the flat side. The flat side is this side here that is flat, that is facing up. And there's writing on that that is small and hard to see, but you can Google that part number on the flat side and you can get the pin assignments. You can see that the pins are 1, 2, 3 going along underneath the pins. So those will always be the pin numbers, but which is the base, the collector, and the emitter will vary depending on the manufacturer and the part. So looking at a spec sheet, this spec sheet that I'm showing you is for PN222, which is the type of transistor I have, but not the type that you have. So yours will be different. But this is how they're labeled. So for this transistor, the emitter is pin 1, the base is pin 2, and the collector is pin 3. And you can see again, here's the 1, 2, 3. Looking at the lower right, the little picture of the transistor, and above that you can see how it relates to the circuit diagram. These numbers are super useful, and these are the sort of thing that you would want to write on your own schematic. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to label the schematic. Now, your labeling, you can see here I've written in pencil 1, 2, 3 for a schematic that I wrote out by pen. Now, you guys are much more likely to have a schematic that you have done much more neatly by using fritzing or one that you found online that you want to use. So do the labeling either by printing it out and then labeling it in pencil, or if you just want to open it in Microsoft Paint or whatever dodgy editing software that you happen to have to hand, putting the pin labels on it will make it way easier to plug in. Okay, and then as we're getting ready to do the circuit that was in that last slide, we're going to gather our parts. Now you have a grab bag of resistors. Hopefully you have a 330 resistor, but you might not. You might have a much very common 220 resistor. 220 resistors are great. They work fine for this project because it's not controlling frequency. It's just controlling an on-off switch, so it's fine. Don't go below 220 because bad things might happen. If you need to use resistors in series, if you have two 110s or 350s or whatever, you can put one after the other. There is another video on the Moodle that talks about wiring circuits in parallel and series that goes into more detail about how to do that. Now that we have our parts, we have our two resistors, our one LED, and our transistor. After we've got those ready, after we've got our schematic labeled, we are ready to build our switch. Here I've got my circuit diagram that I've hand drawn out, and you can see that I have labeled the transistor with the pin numbers. There's 1, 2, 3. These are the pin numbers for my transistor. I have gotten this by looking at the spec sheet for the transistor. So if you have a different transistor, which you probably do, you're going to need to look at the spec sheet for it and label those pins appropriately. But I'm going to show you how to build this circuit with these pins, and hopefully I trust that you will be able to do it with your own pin assignments. So we can see that the most complicated thing in that circuit by far is the transistor. So we're going to start in by putting in the transistor. So here it is with the 3 pins, and we're going to put the 3 pins here so that they're in a parallel line with this notch in the middle. That notch in the middle is a sign of the orientation of the breadboard. So there are connections in the breadboard, remember, that are pre-connected, that are going in perpendicular directions to the notch in the middle. So we want to make sure that every pin of this transistor is on its own connection. We don't want to short it, so we make sure that its parallels to the connections on the perpendicular axis are fine. Okay, so there's our transistor. Now we can see that the next most complicated bit is clearly that part with the LED, and that's coming into pin 3. So let's attach the LED to pin 3. Okay, LEDs, as we recall, are diodes. That means electricity only flows through them in one direction, and they're keyed by having a long leg and a short leg. So the short leg is the cathode side, so we're going to make sure to put the long leg into the free slot. Now it's slightly hard to see here, but the cathode pin of the LED and the third pin of the transistor are in the same row going this way. And this means that there's an electrical connection between them, so this is what we want. Okay, the next thing that we're going to want is a transistor going to the positive side of the power rail here. Okay, here is our transistor. Now this spec there calls for 330, but what I have is a 220, and I know that it won't blow up if I do that, so I'm going to use it anyway. So I'm going to plug this in so it's on the same pin as the anode side of the LED, and that it goes into the power bar of the resistor, and just push that right in to get well seated, and there we go. Okay, the next thing that we can see, that's if we're looking down the circuit this way, is that we've got resistor 2 going to, for me, pin 2 of the transistor. Now for you, that may well be a different pin number. Remember that pin 2 is the middle pin, because the pins go 1, 2, 3. So let's connect that to the positive power bar as well. Okay, it's slightly fiddly, but we get there in the end. There we go. Okay, the last pin of the resistor that we're doing just goes to ground, and that's pin 1, which in this case goes to the emitter. So we're just going to use a jumper cable to connect that to ground. And we're going to actually put ground on this top negative to make sure that we don't accidentally plug in things by accident. So there we go. There is our circuit. Built slightly a funny way around. Here's our battery. So we're going to plug in the positive side, and the negative one goes to the negative power rail, which is at the top in this case. And the LED lights up. Okay, now what we wanted to do was test this as a switch. So let's back up a second. Let's put the positive and negative actually on the same side here. So there's our negative. Again, that's the negative terminal. And we're gonna switch this middle resistor so that instead of going to the positive rail, it goes to the negative rail. Okay, and then we plug it in, and it doesn't light up because the transistor is off. Okay, this is an easy circuit to build for your first circuit, and hopefully this will give you the clues that you need to go on for the more complicated one.